Let's go to where the draft gets a little bit more fun, Wiz, because this is where we don't know what's going to happen. Second on the clock are the Washington going Commandos. And third are your New England Patriots. For me, I wanted to kind of start by talking about Jayden Daniels because I definitely like the fit in Washington better. Wiz, I think the path to success in Washington is much easier to see for a player like Jayden Daniels with the wide receivers, the running backs, Cliff Kingsbury at offensive coordinator. You being that Patriots fan, what do you like as far as the fit? Do you like Jayden Daniels as a fit in Washington better, or are you maybe hoping that he comes down to Foxborough?
Yeah, so it's funny, man. If you asked me this about a month ago, I probably would have said I'm kind of ready to take the plunge on somebody like Jayden Daniels. But the more I kind of looked into it a little bit and seeing some of the pressure to sack stuff with him just really made me kind of think about this is a guy that is definitely going to need some infrastructure and an offense kind of really tailored to him really in the beginning, so he doesn't kind of get off on that wrong foot and kind of see maybe what we haven't or saw what happened to Justin Fields, right? Like I think that's something that we want to go ahead and avoid. So personally, I don't think New England is the place for that infrastructure right now. Obviously we're completely devoid of like a lack of skill guys. We're rolling out Pop Douglas and Hunter Henry as our number 1 and 2 targets in the passing game right now. I like those guys, but like giving a rookie quarterback that to start is kind of tough sledding. And then you think about kind of what Washington has done this offseason, right? Say what you want about Cliff Kingsbury. I'm not saying he's one of like the greatest coaches in the world or anything like that, but look, he's got experience with some mobile quarterbacks. He's got experience with guys that kind of play, off kilter a little bit. He was there at Texas Tech with Mahomes. That's not a comp for Jayden to Mahomes by any means, but he recruited Kyler to Texas Tech and then ended up coaching him in Arizona, right? So like these kind of off script guys that, can run around, can make plays, look downfield, look to drive the ball downfield. He's got experience with those guys. And he just feels like a much better coach as opposed to like Alex Van Pelt to kind of suit an offense to somebody like Jayden Daniels right now.
Yeah.
And that's just one part, right? Because the other part is, look, like Terry McLaurin and yes, Jahan Dotson struggled last year, as we kind of talked about last episode, but I think we could both agree that those are much two better options for a rookie quarterback to come in and have the option to throw to. And you add in an experienced pass catching running back like Austin Eckler, right? Like he's not the Austin Eckler of old, but those are three guys that like feel like they could give a nice little environment for a rookie quarterback to kind of get off on the right foot. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. I think Cliff Kingsbury is one of the bigger factors in that because we've just because we've seen it, right? So it adds a little bit of a factor of certainty. And I think for me, if we're looking at Jayden Daniels' college production, and some of the big questions were early career production at Arizona State, and then coming over to LSU, had a decent first season, and then absolutely went nuclear last year. We would like to see his NFL situation mimic that as best as possible. You know what I mean? With those questions about what he would look like devoid of weapons, I think we want those two beast wide receivers, maybe not like a Neighbors and Brian Thomas in McLaurin and Dotson, but still quality guys. So I think everything you said there was really, really good. And I think if he goes there, looking at some of his deep passing and looking at some of the stuff that he did off schedule, I think Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are immediately activated as resurgent dynasty assets for me. We've been saying to go out and buy these guys for a couple months now, just because we know they're going to get a new quarterback. And I think that take only gets further cemented. I think he can be a great deep passer. I think the mobility that he brings can allow Cliff to be very creative in this offense, because I looked into Cliff's offenses as well. And in those 4 years as Cardinals head coach, he was top 10 in plays run in all but his first season with the Cardinals, top 10 in rush attempts in 2 of those 4 seasons, which is definitely a factor of having that Russian quarterback. And then in 2022, Kyler Murray, they weren't in that top 10 because Kyler Murray was injured. So yeah, I think if Jayden Daniels, and you know that I love Jayden Daniels for that fantasy upside, not comparing him to Lamar Jackson, but I could see like a career path in kind of that archetype or whatever you want to call it for Jayden Daniels, especially being that he's going to be drafted way higher than Lamar Jackson. And there was a ton of uncertainty around Lamar Jackson when he entered the league as well. So if Jayden Daniels goes to Washington, Wiz, it might be pants off on draft night for me.
Yeah.
But that's becoming a common thread. So maybe I just like to take my shit off sometimes. But um, if if Jayden Daniels is drafted in Washington, I ask you this: he is the quarterback what in 2024? Assuming that he starts in week 1 and assuming health, of course. How high do you think he can fly as a Commander?
So when you kind of posed this question, I kind of started to think about, all right, like, so where does he kind of start to slot in? And when you think about the case that you just made, right, like you kind of have to think of all the parts together. So if they can build that offense where, look, they can take some deep shots with McLaurin, maybe Dotson works underneath a little bit more. And to your point, some of those designed runs are going to elevate his rushing floor, right? So I start to see him kind of like around, QB 12, QB 13 ish, right? Like you're talking about like right after like Jordan Love, like kind of Brock Purdy. And, then you start getting into like Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, right? And like, anybody who's been following me on Twitter knows I have some concerns about Justin Herbert from a volume perspective,
Yeah.
but and look, I know that guys like what Purdy has shown, and we kind of know specifically what Love showed last year from a passing ability perspective. Just because I'm ranking him kind of near those guys does not mean I'm saying that, right? It's that rushing upside that kind of
Yeah.
bridges the gap there. And look, I think if it's tough sledding for him those first few games, but he can find some things to build on with Cliff as the season goes on. I do kind of see a world where, like, look, he's probably flirting around that fringe QB1. And then, look, if things click, can he creep his way into the top 10 with some of that rushing upside? I don't think it's necessarily out of the question. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out in Washington this year.
Yeah, and I just think like the way that he runs the ball, he basically just has to show up and he's a top 15 quarterback, you know what I mean? It's just going to
Yeah.
be like that easy. He could throw 200 passing yards and 2 touchdowns all season long and have 0 passing ceiling, and the rushing gives him both floor and some form of ceiling where he doesn't get via passing. So I like that take and just really, really love the thought of Jayden Daniels there. I'm going to give you a little bit of an either or here, Wiz, because I started my best ball rankings this week. I will post them on the site once finished. I spent like an hour in there mainly for this question. I wanted to see where Jayden Daniels was slotted. And I have him pre-landing spot. Wiz, I have him as the quarterback 16, just behind Caleb Williams. And I think I kind of showed a little bit of restraint with that, to be completely honest with you. But
Yeah.
I think definitely to your point, I think if he lands in Washington, I would bump him up into that top 12. So if you're looking at it, Jayden Williams, Jayden Daniels in Washington, or Caleb
Yeah.
Williams in Chicago for 2024
Caleb
alone.
Williams.
Caleb
Yeah. I'll
Williams.
take
Okay, yeah,
Caleb
it's
Williams.
pretty
Yeah.
close. I got Caleb right ahead of him, but it's close. And I think Caleb Williams could be bumping up as well. Jayden Daniels in Washington or Brock Purdy for 2024.
Yeah, see, this is where I started to see, because like, look, I think Purdy was just like insanely efficient last year, and maybe that continues again this year. It's kind of hard to bet against the guy at this point. That's a I'll lean Purdy there, but like if you told me like as we move towards like through the season here and we start to see some of that rushing upside and he becomes more efficient as a passer, again, I just don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for him to kind of sneak into that, back half of the top 12.
Yeah. No, I like it. I like it. Last one, Tua.
It's tough, man, because like if you tell me, do I get Tua for the first 6 weeks, then yeah, like I'll take Tua every time. But the problem is like Tua comes out like a ball on fire. And then as soon as it gets cold, we kind of see that drop off, and it's just been really pronounced each of the last few years. Um, you know what? I'll take Jayden Daniels there. I will.
Love it. Love it. Me too.
And look, some of this is like if you're thinking about it, it's like, well, Brock Purdy finished, QB6 or QB7 last year, right? Like, how can you kind of say that? Well, you got to remember how many quarterbacks got hurt last year too, right? Like
Yeah,
we didn't
exactly.
have
Good
guys
point.
like we didn't have guys like Burrow in there who are immediately going to slot back in. I mean, so I think there's some injuries that kind of elevated him a bit, and we might see him Brock kind of fall down to that back half of the top 12 this year.
I dig it. I dig it.